welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. I'm Omi Bell, and I'm so excited for this next segment. Today, our topic is Project 2025 Diverging Paths for America's Future. And I have a moderated conversation that we're about to get started with William Roberts, Senior VP of Rights and Justice for the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Raynard Jackson, Republican strategist, consultant, lobbyist, and radio show host. I'm going to read their bios, welcome them to the show, and then we'll get started with our first question. So just to let everybody know a little bit about how this is going to go, each person will get 3 minutes to answer each question. They will have an opportunity to respond to each other if necessary, or if they would like to add comments on what the other one has said. Our team is ready and on mute and dispute duty. So if there is misinformation or disinformation, if there is something that we need to fact check, they'll do that. If things get, I doubt that things will get heated, but if they do, we'll have to mute, if necessary, just to keep everything going. I want to be clear that my purpose for doing this is centered around humanity first. I believe that it is important that people understand Project 2025 and its impact. I believe that people need to understand like what parts benefit them, what parts don't. I think people need to be able to make a sound decision on Project 2025 itself. So I am no doubt voting blue, and this is not necessarily about who you should vote for and that kind of thing. That's not the conversation. This is really about unpacking what is a 900-page document that likely most citizens will not read every page. And so being able to bring this conversation to light is really about focusing on what this could mean for America's future, good, bad, right, wrong, and different, but what did this actually mean? So I want to actually let that be known as we get started. So today, William J. Roberts, who's joining us, is the Senior Vice President for Rights and Justice at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, where he leads the organization's cross-cutting work on bold, large-scale policy solutions that advance rights, justice, and equity, and seize the current opportunity to build a better America where all people have an equal opportunity to thrive. Roberts has had a long career in and out of government, focused on civil rights and the removal of structural barriers and reduce access to opportunity for all Americans. In his role at American Progress, Robert leads the development, communication, and execution of policy that cuts across the issues of criminal justice, disability justice, gun violence prevention, immigration, LGBTQIA+ rights, and racial equity and justice. He is a proud alumnus of Howard University, Aggie Pride, but we can still be friends. And also joining me is Raynard Jackson, the president and CEO of Raynard Jackson and Associates LLC, a government public relations and political consulting firm in Washington, D.C. He has a proven record of balancing public policy with fundamental freedoms associated with a free market capitalistic society. Jackson spent years working in corporate finance and accounting and has written and been quoted in hundreds of newspapers across the country, including the Washington Post, Washington Times, Detroit Free Press, the Houston Chronicle, Jet Magazine, and Emerge Magazine, the National Journal, and more. Raynard Jackson and Associates focuses on 4 areas: political consulting, government affairs, public and international relations, and athletes and entertainers. Welcome to the show, Mr. Jackson and Mr. Roberts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How y'all feeling this morning?
Feeling great.
Well, you could have given a longer standing ovation for me and William. Don't cut it short now. Get those questions.
We got Daryl on the buttons, okay? We got Daryl on the buttons, all right. There we go. There we go. Coming to the stage.
Appreciate you, Daryl. I can travel with you.
All right, so we're going to jump into this conversation again. Like we're going to be unpacking Project 2025. So, Raynard, I'll start with you. Project 2025 outlines a significant shift in federal power. What do you believe will be the most impactful change if this agenda is implemented? And how would it affect the average American?
Well, I want to thank you, Omi, for having me on your show. And William, good to talk with you. Be nice to me, okay? Be nice, okay?
I will. Likewise.
But no, I'm looking forward to this conversation. And one of the things I like about your format, Omi, is a lot of the media I do, we have to talk in 5 and 10 second sound bites, because of the nature of talk, TV and radio. So I'm glad you asked the question. Project 2025, which I've been intimately involved with from its inception, what I find amazing is that the liberal media constantly, when it comes to Black folks, try to scare us with fear, uh, racial outlandish statements that are not based in fact. And so Project 2025, basically, we on my side of the aisle think the government is too invasive in our daily lives. I'm an entrepreneur. You the amount of regulation any entrepreneur has to go through, and it's even worse if you're manufacturing something. And so what Project 2025 is trying to get the government out of your life and only have them involved to the extent that's constitutionally necessary. For example, and a lot of Republicans disagree with me on this issue, while having paid family medical leave may sound like a good idea, that is not the role of the government to be forcing people to give their employees paid medical leave. That's a decision they have to make on their own. So that's a classic example of what Project 2025 addresses. The government's overreach into our daily lives is just too much. Let people, let corporate America, let the individual decide for themselves which is best for them and their family. The government does have legitimate roles. For example, if you're in a car accident and say you have insurance or you don't have insurance, and your insurance runs out or you never had insurance, I think there's a legitimate role for the government to help someone in a situation like that. So there's a role for the government. Project 25 is saying we want the government to have a less of a role in our lives versus a greater role.
Thank you for that. I'm gonna toss the same question over to you, William. Project 2025 outlines a significant shift in federal power. What do you believe will be the most impactful change if this agenda is implemented? How would it affect the average American?
Totally. Well, thanks as well for having me on for this important discussion. Definitely have some things to say about what the brother said, but I will get to that in a second. Let me step back because folks have heard a lot about Project 2025. As you said in your opening, there are a lot of folks who are still trying to figure out what's in the 900 pages, but over the last several months, there have been lots of sort of excavations of what's in there. And so it's a good thing, actually, that Americans are learning what is in it, what is in it. And it's because of the fact that it's such a dark document. Project 2025 is very much so an authoritarian playbook that seeks to gut not only the 250-year-old system of checks and balances that our country is based on, but it is also a blueprint for the way that the right would seek to control the lives of average Americans to devastating policy results. And when the proper way to think about this in the context of everything that's going on is to look at the minoritarian effort that's been going on the right for a long time to lock in power and agency over the way that Americans live our lives. I found it interesting. Raynard talked about it being basically a rule book for how to keep the government from being too invasive. I think most Americans would find that confusing since Project 2025 would be a way for conservatives in power to, for instance, implement a nationwide abortion ban, which is the opposite of sort of hands-off laissez-faire on folks' rights. So we can dig into that. But if you look at it through many issues that it goes through, whether it's reproductive rights, on abortion and contraception issues, on the economy, to the way that it looks at the way that it really locks in a viewpoint of looking out for corporations versus workers and union power, suppressing dissent on the democracy side, targeting civil servants, removing civil servants from the government and replacing them with political appointees. If you look at the way that it helps to spur on the attacks that we've seen on diversity, equity, and inclusion, book censorship, attacks on the LGBTQI community, you name it, it is really a playbook for all that. And there's also a scaffolding for some of the attacks and assaults on those issues that you've seen on the right. The other thing I'd say is that Project 2025, again, is less about policy, although the policies in it are terrible. It's about power. but it is also about what's happening right now in states. So it's not just sort of a conceptual document. If you look at states like Texas and Florida, where some of these policies are in effect now, Project 2025 is not theoretical for Americans living in
Okay.
those states.
Thank you. Thank you so
Sure.
much. We're at the 3 minute mark. I wanna make sure we keep it moving. And
Sure.
I do want to make a note to yourself because I do want to give you an opportunity to share if you had any thoughts that you wanted to add back. So I want to move on to a second question. Part of what I'm hearing both of you say at this moment is I'm hearing Mr. Jackson talk about the idea of the American citizens' autonomy and what that looks like across different realms, especially as a business owner. And we know that even in tech, like having less regulation can be helpful. On one side, there is also a world where I've testified in front of Congress about lowering the accredited investor definition because it would allow more people in. So in that way, I feel like we all want certain levels of diversity in that sense. Whereas like it's some of this less regulation on this finance side would help more people get in. However, right, on the other side, what I'm also hearing you say, Mr. Roberts, is that while there is a sort of like we want you to have autonomy based on these policies, there's also this like, yeah, but we want it to be selective, right? So there's also this like selective autonomy where like maybe on your finance we want to deregulate, but we don't want to deregulate your body or what the woman can do with her reproductive organs or that kind of thing. And so I think like really highlighting that there's two sides of this coin here, right? It's on a range of things that just need more context and conversation. Going to question two. Critics argue that Project 2025 could lead to a rollback of key social and environmental protections. How do each of you respond to concerns about the potential long-term consequences of these policy changes? At this time, I'll start with you, Mr. Roberts, and then we'll go to you, Mr. Jackson.
Sure. I think the critics will be spot on there in that what you see in Project 2025, and for folks who haven't read the document, it sort of goes through each federal agency chapter and verse talking about the things that would be swapped out, the policies that would be implemented and killed. And when it comes to environmental regulation, Project 2025 is about deregulation. It's about deregulating toxins that are in our air and water. It's about eliminating policies already in effect, like President Biden's bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act that the Biden-Harris administration got through Congress that has some of the strongest climate crisis mitigation policy in it that we've ever seen. Project 2025 would roll back all of that stuff. It would take us out of global agreements, regulating and fighting the climate crisis. And again, when it comes down to bringing it down to our communities, some of these policies already in effect are doing things like mitigating damage from lead pipes that we know are still all around the nation, especially in Black communities. 22 million people, I think, around are impacted by lead pipes, disproportionately our people. And so Project 2025 would kill policies and roll them back that are helping right now. And so it is, in effect, a plan to take us backwards when it comes to the fight against the climate crisis. And I think most Americans, no matter your political persuasion or how read up you are on the issues, understand, whether it's looking at the dangerous heat we've got going on, whether it's looking at some other things in the news, understand that we're in a climate crisis and a climate emergency, that we need to do something about it. And Project 2025 would take us the wrong direction.
I'm gonna toss that question to you also, Mr. Jackson. Critics are arguing that Project 2025 could lead to the rollback of key social and environmental protections. What do you think about that? What are the potential long-term consequences of some of this policy change?
Because I find it amazing. The root word of liberal is lie, and that's exactly what folks in the environmental move. Isn't it amazing that Biden and Harris administration has pushed this electric vehicle initiative, and yet no one talks about China makes 80% of the batteries necessary to operate an electrical vehicle, number one. So we're giving billions and billions of dollars to our number one enemy globally, number one. Number two, isn't it amazing that when you use this useful life in your electric battery, it is worse than storing nuclear waste as far as the half life and the biodegradability of that. So it's more harmful to the very environment you claim to be saving by having an electric vehicle. Oh, and by the way, electric cars weigh almost 4 times the amount of a combustible old fashioned car. So that means in order to have all these electrical vehicles on the road like Biden and Harris want, you would have to redo all your roads and bridges because our roads and bridges are not built to handle that type of weight on a regular basis. So that's number one. Number two, isn't it amazing that in Flint, Michigan, a few years ago, we had the lead pipes and the poison water, Flint being predominantly black? Isn't it amazing that Democrat governors have controlled Michigan for over a decade, and they still have not corrected that pipe, those problems with the pipe and the water? So liberals are great at complaining about a problem, but when they're in a position to do something about it, I find it amazing they can find money to put up illegals in $500 a night hotel, but they can't clean up the water and the infrastructure in Flint, Michigan. I find that amazing.
Couple things that I want to highlight. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. Couple notes that we're finding as we're bringing in more information. Project 2025 lays out quite aggressive proposal to use federal power to prevent abortions and restrict certain contraceptive coverage. It even says that pornography should be outlawed and its creator and distributors should be imprisoned. There are also many claims circulating about things purportedly in Project 2025 that are in fact not there. It does, for instance, propose ending no fault divorce. Another piece is there's a lot here in terms of like govern our daily lives, right? So again, back to the deregulating versus the regulating everything, selective regulation. Page 62, abolishing the Gender Policy Council would eliminate central promotion of abortion and health services, comprehensive sexuality education, and the new woke gender ideology, which has a principal tenet, gender affirming care and sex change surgeries on minors. Page 60 also says that the president should instruct the Council on Environmental Quality to rewrite its regulation, implementing the National Environmental Policy Act along the lines of historic 2020 efforts and restoring its key provisions, such as banning the use of cumulative impact analysis. Um, I'm curious, and we got to go to a break in about 2 minutes. I'm curious for both of you as to why do you think there need to be this policy in its depth of governing American life? So there's your body, there is who you can marry, there is who you can't marry, there is what car you can drive or not drive. What Amir also say, Mr. Jackson is related to environmental. There's so many things here that are tacking on to these different huge parts of life, and they're so overarching, but they don't get nuanced. So when we talk about abortion, a lot of people focus on babies dying or death, but there's the other part of abortion that we want more people to look at, which is governing the body and what you can do with it. And where would it end if we say, okay, well, you can tell somebody they can have an abortion, whether they are dying, right? Because this is the case where they're dying or not dying, like their life is a threat. They cannot abort the baby, right? In that sense, because the idea of like people just out here using abortion for birth control, like that is not what we're talking about as related to abortion. There's an overarching word. And then when it comes to, well, you can have an EV, you can't have an EV, what's better for you? Who gets to say what's better for people? Does Project 2025 either pull back from saying what's better for people and actually let them choose? I want to hear more about that. Or is it actually telling you everything that's better for people as a sort of layout of a power control? I'm curious to hear more about that from the both of you. We're going to go to a quick break. When we come back, we get into this power dynamic around controlling all the parts of you or controlling no parts of you. And where is that truth actually laying out in the way that the words are written and what's going to be pushed forward? Right now, you listen to a moderated conversation about Project 2025 with the awesome William Roberts. who is from the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Raynard Jackson, a well-awarded and known Republican political consultant. This is actually super exciting for me, and I'm sure for our audience. I'm excited to continue this conversation about Project 2025 and just setting the tone. If you're just joining us, we are really just unpacking it, I've told them, and we all agree, just keeping it real, just keeping it on it. That's really where I'm at with it. So you can hear as much information as possible about it and what's inside of it. It's 900 pages, and I would dare say most Americans probably won't read each page. And so if there's any way that I could be bringing more information to you, this is one of those ways. And so that is what we're doing today. Rainer, I'm going to toss this to you. From a Republican perspective, where are the primary goals of Project 2025, and how do they align with the current needs of American people from the way you see it?
Well, I think given the choice, Americans are very capable of making choices that are in their own best interest. I think over a period of decades, the government has gotten too involved in Americans' lives in general, across the board, black, white, liberal, conservative. And I think our founding fathers' original position was the government should only be involved in our lives when it's only necessary. But now we got the government trying to tell us what the minimum wage should be for a private sector company. We have 1.8 government workers, and we should have probably two or 300,000 at best. But on top of that, we have almost 18 million contractors. So the government has removed people from the official government payroll and hired people as contractors. And so the government has gotten so large. And the recent Chevron decision by the Supreme Court, that the whole premise behind that was you got unelected bureaucrats who have no congressional authority whatsoever. They have more power in a lot of ways than the president of the United States to set policy. And so you see this conservative Supreme Court even codifying that the government is too invasive in our lives. And Project 2025 is just laying out a baseline of policies that's saying, let's remove the government back from our lives and only have them involved where it's absolutely necessary. And the debate is, when is it necessary and when is it not? That's a legitimate grounds for debate.
Yeah, 100%. William, what do you think? How do these goals contrast with the progressive vision for America?
So it's interesting to hear Raynard bring in the courts because there is a layer here, which I'll get to in a second, about how the courts connect to this. Earlier, Raynard said the something incorrect. I want to correct the base of liberal is lie. The base of liberal is liberty, actually. And the perspective of progressives on what kind of country we want to have, what kind of outlook we need, is a one where people have more personal freedom, autonomy, and liberty through all aspects of their lives. And again, back to this control, it is interesting to hear about how the government should be, from a conservative perspective, only involved in Americans' lives when it's absolutely necessary. But you see in Project 2025 and overall in conservative ideology and policy perspectives, pushing the government into our lives in places where they think it's appropriate. So in between a woman and her doctor to make decisions about her health care, in between folks in the private sector who are trying to recognize diversity, equity, and inclusion as a strength of our country and also a driver of American economic power, who decide that our government, the department, whether it's the Department of Education, the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, and all other offices that have been focused on unlocking diversity, equity, and inclusion as a strength, need now under Project 2025 to be focused on rooting out anti-white racism, which doesn't exist. Need now to be pulling back on those protections. And so I think what I do agree with what Raynard said is that Americans are smart enough to understand what's going on and to decide, what kind of vision they want for their future. And again, under Project 2025, whether it is education, healthcare, reproductive health, the economy, on and on, You see a drive to get in the middle of what Americans are thinking and feeling in their lives. The last thing I'll say on the court, since you brought it up, my brother, Chevron was not about deregulation and getting unelected bureaucrats out of the way. Chevron is about a decision to put non-expert judges versus expertise within our federal agencies over making decisions about air quality and what goes in our food and all the rest. And so what you see is that Project 2025, coupled with the deregulatory tear that our Supreme Court has been on, thanks to Clarence Thomas and his benefactors like Harlan Crow, who were bankrolling his life. What you see again is this control that is represented by this agenda, this control is represented by these policies that Americans don't want.
Raynard, I'm curious, when I think about the government being an employer and, being like one of the largest employers, and I think about, what you mentioned about FMLA, and I think about DEI, I'm really just curious to just ask a very, very simple, not complex, maybe not even highly political question. What is wrong with that? Like, what is wrong with the government being an employer? What is wrong with having FMLA? I mean, some guarantee that, like, if you get sick and you have to be off work for an extended amount of time, you can't afford to take time, that your job will still be guaranteed for you. What is wrong with having a diverse group of people represent your company in a way that if you're not going to do it naturally, there are some rules and things that say, hey, you should do it. What is wrong with that?
Interesting question, Omi, and I'm glad you asked that question. A year ago, last June, Supreme Court overturned basically what we now know as affirmative action. And so I did a lot of TV shows around the world, radio shows, and I'm a syndicated newspaper columnist, have been for 25 years. And so I've written extensively on my opposition to affirmative action. And William, you may appreciate this, not for the reason that most people think. The reason I oppose affirmative action and I was supportive of what the Supreme Court did a year ago, June, was why is it, no offense to your background, Omi, you can be from Nigeria, become an American citizen, and you qualify for all these preference programs. You can be a Chinese person who becomes an American citizen. You qualify for all these programs. You can be homosexual, transsexual. So by the time it gets down to Black folks, and I remember having this debate on BET with Jesse Jackson, who I've known since high school. I said, Jesse, you will stipulate that Blacks are not even the primary beneficiary of affirmative action. He said, yes. I said, so how then can Black folks make the argument that if we are not the primary beneficiary, getting rid of affirmative action would be devastating to the Black community? And they went to a quick commercial break, and we never got back to the issue. Now, interesting point is my godfather actually wrote the affirmative action law, Art Fletcher, who was the highest ranking Black in the Nixon administration. So I spent 30 some years of my life sitting at his feet, learning what really happened. And Omi, you have me on again, I can really take you behind the curtain on how affirmative action came to be a law in 1969 as we now know it. My godfather is turned over in his grave now. And so the other thing, and I'll finish with this, I think the biggest blow to affirmative action was then former Vice President Joe Biden in 2019, 2020 during the campaign. He said, if you nominate me as the Democratic nominee, I will pick a Black female as my running mate. If you elect me president, I will pick a Black female for Supreme Court. Now, I don't have a problem with him doing either of those two things, but I think he undercut the whole argument for diversity by basically saying, if you are outside of those parameters, you are not eligible for even consideration. So if you're a Latino woman, you don't qualify to be my vice president. If you are an Asian jurist, you're not eligible for my consideration for the Supreme Court. And so I think he could have done that without mentioning that publicly. Interview some white women, interview some Hispanic women, even though you know in your mind your criteria is already set. He undercut the accomplishment of Ketanji Jackson Brown and of Kamala Harris by doing that publicly.
Well, Trump did promise to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg with a woman. And I think that so one of the things that's interesting about about the idea of diversity is there's somewhere where we're missing that it has not been diverse, and now the shift makes it diverse. There's that gets lost for like the moment that like the choice happens to be diverse and forward. So like there's like if so for example, if there has historically not been any men in the room, all right, or historically not been any women in the room, right, and then we add women to the room, how does that become the problem versus like the problem being there was not any women in the room? So like
Right.
the
I mean, and
historically,
I would love to jump in.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
So, because your question was about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I don't know how we got all the way down the road to calling to essentially nodding to Kamala Harris as a quote DEI pick, which is reprehensible to say the least. Most qualified, one of the most qualified people to be vice president, certainly would be the most qualified, one of the most qualified people to be president. But what you see in this conversation actually is the equating of affirmative action and DEI to suggest that diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility programs are about affirmative action, are just are just about what conservatives would call box checking, instead of about opening the aperture of opportunity to what has not been there before. To your point, Omi, the reason, for instance, that the Biden-Harris administration started out with 2 executive orders on wholesale up top to bottom look at our government and how we do equity in our programs inside and outside government was because they understood that our system of government, this country that we love, was not set up for all of us at the beginning. And as we have continued to make progress, we got to keep pushing for more, right? And so the reason that the Biden-Harris administration was looking at these agency equity plans that are now being in effect are about how do we make our government work best for all of us. So, Raynard, to your point, if we're actually concerned about folks being left out, folks in the Black community, in our communities being left out, which we can have a conversation about that because I do not agree with the point you were making, but if we are concerned about that, then one part of the answer is some of the work that this administration had been doing. And by the way, the work that Project 2025 would undo, because Project 2025 affirmatively stops things like data collection on who is served by programs and looking at the way that the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, deploys its limited resources. It would change that to be again looking for anti-white racism instead of looking at the ways that the majority of us are served. It would strip away, kill every equity action plan that has gone on through the Biden-Harris administration across agencies. And so the two things just do not compute for me. If we are interested in this stuff, then why are we pushing a plan like Project 2025 that completely strips that away and decides to set up a plan to focus on things that don't exist while tearing down programs that have been helping the majority of Americans?
Let me interject on that. Omi, you were talking about this issue of diversity. For example, according to your theory, there are not a lot of Blacks in hockey. And I don't know any Blacks in the sport of curling. You sliding on the ice and all that. So the NHL, the National Hockey League, did something stupid as heck 2 or 3 years ago. They looked and saw there were very few Black hockey players on the professional level. They allocated, I think, $100 million for diversity. But Umi and William, maybe Blacks are not interested in hockey. Maybe Blacks are not interested in curling.
Or maybe they are.
They are,
and nobody's done. And there are and nobody's done the work to find them. So one of the examples of this that I give, and I mean, like, this is, we could debate this all night, but I want to get to another question. But one of the examples that I give is that there's two things. When a certain group of people keep showing up to an event and people are like, dang, these people keep showing up to this event, it's because you're only talking to those people. And that don't even have to be race, gender, whatever. I'm just saying that, like, your email list is limited to these people. And so in order for you to grow your email list, and that's why I'm breaking it down really simply. In order for you to grow your email list, you have to take a different kind of step. Now, if you just want to keep talking to the people that you're talking to, the people that initially met you, doesn't mean that nobody else is out there. It just means that you're continuing to talk to the people you're talking to.
Right, I agree with you, Omi, but does that make you racist? Because, for example, the hockey league, there are not a
It
lot
doesn't.
of, there's not a
It does
lot
not make anybody racist. And I don't know I don't know that that's always the conversation. I feel like that's
Not
a way
actually the
to
conversation we're
incite an
having.
audience.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not having a conversation about racism. I don't
not
think
the
it makes you
conversation.
racist
NHL did
at
what
all.
they got backlash in their mind. Their corporate offices, they were not diverse enough, and this is on the heels of the George Floyd. So they said, let us allocate $100 million to
Well,
diversify hockey when there's no
but
clamoring
again,
to go to hockey games.
and I don't mean to talk over you because I definitely want folks to hear the conversation, but the hockey example that you're giving, while interesting in some world, does not equate, for instance, to the Minority Business Development Agency, which had been helping out Black entrepreneurs for decades. That the courts, not the Supreme Court, but a very conservative court, decided to knock down under the legal theory coming from the affirmative action decision that somehow the government's action to help out and expand opportunities, not at the expense of other people, by the way, because there's enough pie to go around, but to expand opportunities for Black and brown small business folks, right, was somehow offensive to folks. For your argument is the same argument that's being used in the Fearless Fund case. That's saying that this venture capital firm directed at Black women trying to own businesses is somehow dangerous and injurious to non-Black women, to white men and other folks. And this is not, again, no one has used the term racist here. You brought it up. But this is an ideology through the courts, through policy, that say that, again, going back to what we started talking about, what is the role of government? What kind of society do you want to live in? There's an ideology that says that government leaning in to provide greater paths to opportunity and equity is a threat to folks who are already provided a lot of paths to opportunity and equity, right? Your blessing is not gonna, my blessing is not gonna impact your blessing, brother, right? Like, you being able to get ahead, whatever you are, whatever race you are, whatever, gender, ethnic background you are, is not gonna impact mine. But what the ideology behind Project 2025 says is that it does. And so it says we got to pull all this back because we're doing too much. Too much equity, too much opportunity and inclusion. And so we're not talking about the NHL and Microsoft. We're talking about the federal government that has a responsibility and a mandate to be looking out for all of us, to be making sure that all of our boats rise, and a plan, Project 2025, that says that we're going to roll back all of that in an effort to control, again, and dictate who gets what opportunities. And again, it goes across all
Mr.
kinds
Roberts,
of
I'm
issues.
so sorry to cut you off. I'm so sorry to cut you off. Trying to stick to the 3-minute rule.
Sure.
We got to go to a quick break though. This is heating up, and I really appreciate it. When we come back, I really just want another straight up, very simple question: is how does this affect Black people? The question we all want to know. I got 2 Black men on here with me as a Black woman, and we all doing our Black jobs today, and so I want to know how does this affect Black people? We got to go to a quick break and listen to Urban Review Mornings with Omi Bell. We'll be right back. How does Project 2025 impact positively or negatively Black people?
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I think, and should be no surprise from the conversation we've had already, that as Project 2025 is targeted at sort of controlling and restricting rights, that for our communities, it's a dangerous document, a dangerous plan and manifesto. Uh, I mentioned before, right, the way that Project 2025 wants to take the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, which has been targeted, aimed at investigating issues of civil rights violations and discrimination and remediating that, wants to turn that on its head, wants to turn our longstanding civil rights laws on their head to make them, under the fake wokeness, anti-wokeness agenda into like some kind of arm to seek out anti-white racism. But leave that aside for a second. Let's look at something fairly innocuous, perhaps, like education in the country. Project 2025, as most conservatives have for a long time, wants to eliminate the federal Department of Education. You may say, okay, fine. How does that impact me? Look at states like Texas, where in schools, not only the fact that public schools and public education are under threat, but in schools where they're banning books, telling you what you can and can't learn, that's what would be going on nationally. Look at healthcare, where not just on reproductive health, which we've talked about, the ways that Project 2025 would make it easier to eliminate IVF, to pass a national abortion ban, but to get critical health care, right? Because those issues aren't just about abortion and birth, they're about healthcare. Impacts our communities. Look at the ways that it would repeal and not replace the Affordable Care Act that so many folks in our communities rely on. Look at the ways back to education, right, that it would eliminate Head Start. Head Start, which I think 2 in 3 children served by Head Start are Black or Latino. Proposes to eliminate that entirely. And so there's nothing in this agenda, in my view, that is about expanding and empowering the Black community. It's about control over the things that a political ideology thinks, is palatable for us.
And
I
sending it
think
over to you, Raynard. Go ahead.
what most folks do not talk about relative to Project 2025, and it's an anomaly in any whether you come from the left or the right. In that document, you have people from the conservative perspective arguing opposite ends of a trade policy. So they got one who wants less trade and lower tariff. You got someone who wants more. That's unusual for any think tank to show competing ideas in their same document. Normally, everyone has to sing from the same hymnal. And so I give the Heritage Foundation a lot of credit for showing the diversity of thought even within the conservative movement. That's number one. Another interesting thing about shrinking the size of government, which is again, that's the guiding principle underlying the whole Project 2025. Let's get the government out of our life unless it's totally necessary to have them. Of all Blacks with college degrees, 60% work for local, state, and federal government. Of the remaining 40%, 25% work for corporate America, leaving basically 15% for entrepreneurship. So in the Black community alone, we have a massive brain drain. Why? Because most of us grew up, mom and dad told us, boy, go to school, keep your nose clean, get a job, and spend 30 years in that job and get the gold watch and die in poverty. We have to, and a part of the reason that this Project 2025 will benefit Blacks, especially those who are entrepreneurial in mindset, is because if we can get the government out of our way. For example, I used to chair the board of professional occupation in Virginia, the appointment by the governor. We had oversight over 17 professions: CPAs, engineers, architects, barbers, cosmetologists, etc. They wanted me to pass through my committee a law that said if you braiding hair at home, you had to go to cosmetology and barber school. And it was set up to keep Black women from braiding hair at home getting paid cash. And I blocked it. I said, no way, as long as I'm chairman of the committee, this is not happening. And it was a discriminatory tactic by the barbers and cosmetologists to keep Black women from braiding hair. Those are the type of things that Project 2025 addresses as far as the decrease in government regulation. And that's a prime example of what I'm talking about.
So we could really talk all night. And like honestly, this hour did not feel like long enough. We are at our last question because there's so much to say. Also, Mr. Jackson, I don't know that you answered that question fully. We probably could have got more into some of your answers. But I think some of the regulation that you spoke about, I get as an entrepreneur, but I think we could have got deeper into that. We only got about 4 minutes left. 3 minutes left? Oh Lord, we got 3 minutes left. Okay, so that means that I can't give y'all both 3 minutes. Okay, so that means like we need to do like a minute on looking forward. All right, looking forward. How do you see the political landscape evolving as a result of Project 2025? And so I'll leave it to, I guess Robert, we can go to you first, I guess. But now we got like 1 minute.
Sure. So just really
Okay.
quickly, I think that Americans are smarter than Project 2025 gives them credit for. The good thing about it, the only good thing about it, is that the Heritage Foundation, the conservative elites who wrote all their plans out on paper, so we can read it. You can go to AmericanProgress.org. We've done lots of working and writing and excavating of Project 2025, so you can see how it impacts particular issues. I think the thing that is going to change in the landscape is that folks are going to come armed with the information and know what the conservative ideology wants to do in our lives, and they're not going to stand for it. And I'll leave
All
it there
right.
because we're quick.
Okay, you did great, Mr. Jackson. Go ahead, you got a minute. 1
I
minute.
think Project 2025 and this year's Trump campaign have awakened the grassroots in the Black community to make them see more of a pro-conservative, pro-Republican, pro-Trump agenda. As I put it to people, Omi and William, the Democrats can't win in November, but Trump can lose. If Trump stays on point on issue and leave all the baggage to the side and just focus strictly on illegal immigration, the economy, unnecessary wars, the size of the government, Trump will win this election in November, with a lot of Black support.
Well, there you have it. Project 2025, Divergent Paths for America's Future. I want to thank my guests for today on this moderated conversation. William Roberts, the Senior Vice President for Rights, Justice at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, and Raynard Jackson, a Republican political consultant, government affairs, and international international relations expert. I really appreciate y'all. This was definitely a gift to our audience, and so super important for us to bring to light, to have a conversation where I feel like it was a chill moment too, even though we could disagree with each other. And I think it's a display of the kind of American citizenship that more people should be exercising. We can disagree and we can move on both sides of the aisle, and we will have to find a place where we work together to progress our entire country of all Americans. And so thank you so much for joining me.